Welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I come from the acting background.
And I'm Josh Knapp. I'm a broadcast engineer.
Here we go.
All right, today we're going to talk about our favorite directors. This is going to be possibly the easiest one of these, I think, to talk about.
You have a huge smile on your face, by the way.
Yeah.
Yippee!
Well, I feel
You're like best actors, not a... Nope, not seen it. Actors, not seen it. Pictures, not seen it. Directors!
Well, I feel like I seek out movies based on directors more than I
Do
seek
ya?
out movies based on actors, and that's probably why there's a lot of movies. That's probably why I've seen the movies that I have seen. Because I can go down a director rabbit hole. It seems like I can a lot easier than I can an actor rabbit hole. And maybe that's because usually takes directors longer to make movies, so it's less daunting. It's like, I've not seen every Jimmy Stewart movie ever made, although I really like Jimmy Stewart. But he's probably been in 100 movies. I don't know, because especially back then they were in 2, 3, 4 movies a year.
Yeah.
But even current actors, they can be in 2 or 3 movies a year, depending on how big their parts are, and so I feel like it's a little bit more, it's easier to
That makes sense.
deal with that. And looking at these directors that I have, like, I've kind of grouped them in, like, this is the pantheon, and then this is everybody else that I have to talk about, and then these are kind of like, other ones maybe. but in the pantheon, it seems like the big thing about these directors is that they there's a couple of exceptions, but they're very picky as to what movies they make. And I mean, you can see that. Top of my list is Kubrick, Fincher, PTA, the Coen brothers. I mean, those guys are all really picky about what they do, what they put their time into. And some of them, overly so. I mean, look at Paul Thomas Anderson. He's done, 6 movies?
Yeah, but like Kubrick, he's one of those ones who you have a thumbprint for every film that he does. Whether or not it has anything similar with other films that he's done. Does Master and Commander have anything to do with Inherent Vice? Maybe not, but there's a style. So he creates a world.
You mean The Master?
What'd I say? The
Master and Commander?
Did I say Master? I'm
I was
thinking
like,
about...
wow, what other Peter Weir movie is he going to pull out?
No, I was thinking of that Ron Howard film earlier today. That's probably where that came.
Master and Commander?
Yeah, that reminds...
So what's that? Something about the
Into
sea?
the Heart of the Sea. Says,
title.
yeah, it's rough. Yeah, and it's based on the real life story that is...
It's not Moby Dick.
Right. Why not?
It's so confusing. No, it should be,
but it's
shouldn't it?
based on the real story that the legend is based on. But I didn't know that the legend was based on a real story. Anyway, I'm sorry. I meant The Master. I said Master and Commander because I just seen the trailer for Into the Heart of the Sea. Mm-hmm. Wow, that is a title. But anyway, so the point is that with Paul Thomas Anderson, there is a world that he creates. I have Darren Aronofsky on my list, and he does the exact same thing. Inarritu does the exact same thing. So I think that it's not about putting out movies just to make movies. It's about creating a world. Kubrick is the godfather of it. Meticulous
to the point
research.
To the point where there are movies that he couldn't make, that he didn't make because he was too embroiled in them. There's a Napoleon movie that he was supposed to make that he could never make.
Right, and there was like a room full of research based on it. And they were like, what do we do with it after he passed away? And so I think they have some form of a warehouse or something that they have it in storage.
There's this amazing Taschen book. Have you ever heard of the...
No.
It's a publisher. They do, like, I think that's how you say it, Tashen. Taschen. And it's this crazy huge book. I'll have to show you a picture of it. This crazy huge book that you open it up and it's a bunch of other books inside, and it's all about his plans, and it's got the script in there, and it's all about his plans for making the Napoleon movie.
That never got made.
Never got made.
Interesting.
And I don't know if there were rights issues or what the big issue was, but I think ultimately he wanted to make these epic he wanted to make the Helm's Deep of battle scenes in 1969 or whatever, 1972, and he couldn't do it because he didn't have CGI and he didn't have any of that stuff. I mean,
can you imagine?
Yeah, down to the point where he had come up with a way to fit the soldiers with paper uniforms
Oh yeah, you told me about this.
so that when they got done with the battle scene, they could reset to one, pull off their paper uniforms that were all dirty and nasty, and put on new paper uniforms. I don't know how that would have looked on Blu-ray, but still
The way he shot it,
or
probably
70 millimeter. You know,
Isn't it Orson Welles who wanted to do Into the Heart of Darkness? Into the Heart of Darkness.
I think
The
it's just called Heart of Darkness.
Heart
the
of
Joseph
Darkness.
Campbell.
I can't get anything right today.
book.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
But he had all these plans, what the boat was going to look like, everything, but he didn't have enough technology to back up his ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So, but isn't that why Kubrick made Barry Lyndon instead? And isn't that why Orson Welles made something else instead? That
Possibly,
had been, what's the one with Charlton Heston, which has the longest shot?
Evil. Oh gosh.
Haha, I gave you the disease of
Time of Evil is all I can come up with,
that's
but that's
not
not
right.
right. It's Touch of Evil.
Yes.
I didn't
think,
look it up.
I think he came up with that instead, or worked on that instead. So, it's a trade-off. But I think the point to this is that these directors have their own thumbprint,
Yeah.
period. And so maybe it takes a while to, get these worlds created. So that's why. And if you're talking about the detail-orientated person like Kubrick, would 2001 have looked the way that it looked if it wasn't for him taking his time? And look at has there been a better sci-fi film that didn't use CG up to that point or after that point for a while until CG took over? No. I mean, I just watched it a couple months ago. It's flawless.
Yeah, it still holds up. And
it looks real. Everything looks real.
And on Blu-ray, it looks even better, which you would think a movie from 1968 would suffer.
Yeah, you would see paper windows or whatever it may be, or plastic windows or whatever, but it's not. It's perfect.
But when you think about it, now that I think about it, he shot that in 70 millimeter, and I mean it's kind of like shooting something in IMAX back in the in the late 60s. I mean, it is. You get so much more detail in the frame on 70 millimeter, and it was being shown in huge theaters on 70 millimeter back then when it came out. So I could see that the resolution of 70 millimeter, if you want to like digitize it like that, is going to be as good or greater than, well, it's going to be greater than even the highest resolution video that we can create nowadays. And so it does kind of make sense that it would look good on Blu-ray or, whatever new form of video there's going to be in the future, because he made the effort to make sure it looked great, because it was going to be shown on these huge screens, whereas other people shooting on 35 millimeter, like you said, there's just going to be paper in the background. Like, nobody's going to see that. You're not going to notice it.
Yeah, there's no such thing as nobody's going to see that in Kubrick world. I think about the scene in Clockwork Orange, which is, a lot of people think it's the violence and the negative world that he creates that makes me not want to see that film again, and that's a compliment. I have to stress that enough. I've seen the movie twice. That's it. I'm done. I don't want to live in that world again. And we've talked about suspension of disbelief and how I can really just go there. Think about his mother's kitchen in Clockwork Orange, where it has kind of like that shiny 70s foil
Wallpaper,
paper.
yeah.
Imagine how much he debated what wallpaper went where. And it's 4 different kinds of wallpaper on each wall. It makes me nauseous. Like, literally, I feel like I'm dizzy when I'm watching it. Like, physically, I'm going to get ill. And it has psychological ramifications, those choices. So I'm wondering how many swatches of wallpaper did he go through before he picked that green?
Hundreds,
I'm sure,
probably.
and he got it right because he took his time. He's smart. He's a smart man.
Well, and he's the smartest guy in the room whenever he's shooting.
Well, at least he's the most knowledgeable because he's researched.
Yeah, in that situation, he knows more about the wallpaper choices in that room than anybody else in the room, because he's the one who spent the time to look through the hundreds of whatever. You could say that for all of that. And I mean, I think David Fincher is as close as we're getting to that right now, where he's kind of the smartest guy in the room. We've talked about that in the past, but I'm not saying that he's a genius.
No, I got what you're saying.
That is concerned. I'm just saying that, like, any kind of questions you may come up with, he's already thought about it.
Yeah, he already has 3 pages of it written down, categorized in subplot B, filing cabinet to your right. Yeah, he's already got it. I just thought about this though. Just think about all of the producers and scenery people and technical people who went along with Kubrick, who go along with Fincher. Now, Fincher has a track record, and so did Kubrick by a certain point in time, but Kubrick's always been like that. Well, maybe not in the beginning of his career, but Fincher's definitely always been like that. A buddy of mine worked on Seven, and he said he was the most meticulous director he's ever been around in his life. Like if there was a leaf that blew into the scene, he would stop everything, get the leaf out of the way, and reshoot. And he shoots on film. So that's...
He did on Seven, yeah.
Yeah, it's costly. It costs a lot of money. And Brad Pitt is doing the scene where he's running across the cars and he falls and he dislocates his wrist or breaks his wrist. And they added that into the movie because he really did it in real life. And Fincher was like, okay, let's put that in. But he said that he would go into these factories and warehouses that they would gut out to make these fictional worlds, you know, like the shut-in guy that has all the pine
the
air fresheners. Yeah, and they would gut out the warehouses and then they would build the sets. But he said that he was so meticulous about it that he would wear on people and that people were getting tired. But just think about all of those hundreds of people who went along with the vision just because this person had so much knowledge of the way they saw something. I think that's brilliant. I think that if you can pull people along with you, that says something about, you know, after 2 or 3 films, you're going to go along with David Fincher.
Yeah.
He's got a track record. But can you imagine his very first film pulling that kind of stuff, and you're the, you know, the assistant director, or you're the cameraman, and or the boom operator, the guy who holds that mic.
Yeah.
They're usually really in
For
good
100
shape.
tapes.
Yeah.
100
Can you
takes,
imagine? That leaf blew in.
No.
I think
I think we're good.
Yeah. You hold the mic, David.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I think that because they're so meticulous, some people may say that they are not as emotionally tied to the material, and I think I may be. That's fine with me because I come from more of a analytical standpoint, and I can look at you know, Kubrick movies or Fincher movies and see the purely aesthetic value and the attention to detail, the value that the attention to detail holds for me, and I can get something from that movie even if it is cold or whatever the adjective would be that, you know, some critics would
See,
give to these.
I think there's a pinwheel of emotions, and just because it's not heartfelt or tear-jerking doesn't mean that you're not as scared as you would be crying in another film as you are in Panic Room, and you are panicked in that room, in that film. You are on pins and needles for 45 minutes of that film, if not longer. So it doesn't matter what emotion he's drawing out of you. He's drawing some kind of emotion. Whatever the emotion you want to call that he got out of you from watching Eyes Wide Shut. Yeah. Are you tearing up? Am I feeling like I felt when I saw Michael Keaton break down in Birdman? No. Did I tear up the same way? No. But he's creating some world that's created some kind of emotion. It's just not the typically applauded emotion. It's not the typical Oscar scene. So I don't know if it's necessarily cold. So I think that Rosamund Pike is a good example from Gone Girl. She's very calculated, very cold, but you do feel something about her, whether it's disdain or hate or distrust, whatever it may be, or good for you, because I've read a whole bunch of articles since I've seen that film about how people are like, yes, she stood up for herself and she did this. And they were, yeah, I know, right? That's crazy. But they were comparing the two, they were two different faces of narcissism is what they called it. Ben Affleck's face, even though his was much more everyday, if you will. Hers was, hidden, but still narcissistic in the same kind of way. But they came from the same family of histrionics, just two different faces of it. So whether or not you want to call that cold or not, it's still an emotion, and he still pulls it out of you. Same with Paul Thomas Anderson. Do I ever tear up in Punch Drunk Love? No, but am I happy crying version? Yes.
Yeah.
Am I tearing up in There Will Be Blood? No, but in Magnolia, he slaps you around. So, you know, it might not be what you typically would call an Oscar-winning moment, but they draw on an emotion that's part of the human condition. So I'm all about it.
Yeah. definitely. So who's on your list?
Well, Hitchcock's number one,
Great.
just because.
Oh, did you rank them?
No, not really. Just when I wrote them down, Kubrick's number two, if you will. Not
Okay.
definitely ranked. Just people. I went to all the list. AFI's 100 best directors, IMDb's best directors, Ask.com's best directors, whatever it may be, and Hitchcock, Kubrick, Spielberg, who we haven't talked a whole lot about.
We talked a little bit though.
A little bit, but
Yeah.
I think this is the night
Yeah.
where we need to delve into Spielberg. So once again, he is definitely the opposite side of somebody like David Fincher or
But his craft is amazing. Like his ability to take all these moving parts and it seems like his movies are more of a collaboration than David Fincher's movies or Stanley Kubrick's movies.
I can see
Because-
how you
because he pulls
Seen
in
that. That's-
Janusz Kaminski.
Yeah.
And he pulls in, the whoever, if they're doing stunts, then he pulls in, the best Vic Armstrong, who's like a great stunt coordinator, pulls in somebody like that, and he'll pull in all these people and make everybody work together and get the most out of everyone. Whereas sometimes I feel like David Fincher's like, I could probably do your job better than you can. And it's like, okay, that's kind of jerky, but
I mean, the proof is in the pudding.
yeah.
So once again, I have a hard time saying anything that could be perceived as negative towards Fincher because that's his personality and that is the way he gets things done. And look what he gets done. So I'm all about it. The thing I find interesting about Spielberg is that he is the mainstream blockbuster director, but he just creates his own worlds and he has a feel about them that is almost feel goodish, if you will, that some people might be like, ugh, that's a little saccharine sweet for me, but he pulls it off. And then here's why Spielberg's on the list, just like everybody else for me. In the middle of something like E.T. and Close Encounters and Jaws, even though those are three separate films, sort of, you can sort of tell that that director's done all three. They're about one man's journey to figure things out. Then he slaps you around with The Color Purple, which, in my opinion, is the best adapted book I've ever seen to a film. There's a few parts tweaked from the book, but, I saw this thing on Twitter today about, it was a picture of a Harry Potter book, and there was a big circle donut pulled out of the book, a whole section of the book pulled out the center. And it said, adapting a novel to a movie is like taking a donut hole shape out of a book. In other words, this is what's going to get left out. You just have to accept that for what it is. I don't know if it was a statement against movies or so forth and so on. For me, The Color Purple has one or two things that are left out, but it's pretty dead on. And then, it's not an easy story to watch, but it's full of emotion, and it's now, Oprah Winfrey is imitated often about, you told Harpo to beat me, all that stuff. And it's really a dangerous film on some kind of level. But would you have thought that guy would have made E.T.? And then you have a few feel-gooders in between, and then you get to Schindler's List. There's 10 or 15 years in between, but my goodness, I cannot watch that film again. Mm-hmm. I've not seen it since the original time I saw it because it was so heavy. And he got a little criticized at the time for the happy-go-lucky ending with all of the survivors put in the stone.
The real life ending, yeah.
And they were like, that's a little cheesy. But you kind of needed it after watching that film and what he pulled out of Ralph Fiennes and Liam Neeson's probably one of his best performances, Ben Kingsley. So Spielberg has a thumbprint, and he has this kind of glowy, feel-goodishness about him. But in between, there's these things where you're like, whoa, wait a second. Minority Report, that's a sharp-edged movie.
Well, I mean, it's my number one sci-fi movie of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, and I didn't know it was.
Yeah, it's edgy when he
Until
do
we
the
sat
eyeballs
down.
thing. Good Lord. It's on a lot of people's lists, by the way.
Yeah, but it's that movie. Yeah, that movie, and then you see he has these years where he came out with Minority Report and Catch Me If You Can in the same year.
Yeah, that's
Because
schizophrenia.
Well, it's because it probably took a lot of time to post-produce Minority Report, but still, I mean, even within probably an 18-month period, he does these types of movies, and both of them were great movies, and I can revisit them multiple times, and they're easy movies to put in. But then, like you said, he has arresting movies. He has movies with arresting scenes. I mean, the first 20 minutes of Saving Private Ryan is, I mean, I saw that in a movie theater with my dad.
It hurts my head thinking about it.
Yeah, who's a veteran, and he's been in the military, and have you seen that with your parents or anything? I mean,
no, we've talked about it because I come from a military family. We've talked about it, but it's one of those things where it's almost like you don't talk too much about it because it's right there on the screen, and the reverence comes from just living it,
trying to understand.
Yeah, trying to put yourself there. And it has been described as the most brutal, realistic 20 minutes ever put on film.
Yeah.
And when the guy takes his helmet off, and dude, seriously, like that just makes you set up. And even though the rest of the film is not as crazy as the first 20 minutes, it's still brutal. It's still rough, and you're still like, what is going to happen? And please don't everybody die.
Exactly.
And then the scene with the mother, it's horrible.
Well,
on the front porch.
Yeah.
That's
well, and you see, and it's the way that, so that's
killing
a perfect,
me thinking about
that's a
it.
perfect Spielberg scene, because that scene, there's no dialogue, and the way that he does tracking shots and he starts off with the 4-star in the window,
the flag, yeah,
the flag with 4 stars in the window, which they don't really explain. I mean, they explain later on in the movie what the mission is, but you can kind of understand what's going on without, there doesn't need to be any kind of like grand exposition of this particular scene. But yeah, I mean, there's those scenes are tense. I mean, they're visually
they're beautiful
and
the dusty road coming up with the cars coming around, but then she goes out to the front porch, and it's horrible.
And
right
she
there.
Just fall. Yeah, she just falls.
It's not
in the
even a
front porch.
fall. It's
a collapse.
It's a collapse, and she does it in this dignified way because you can tell she's not sure what's happening, but she's pretty sure what's going to happen. Yeah, she knows
doesn't know it's as bad as it is.
It's horrible. That's horrible, dude. I think that's worse than that 15 minutes of the fight scene. Now I think about it, it's choking me up thinking about it. We got to go on.
Okay, so I mean, we could talk a lot more. I mean, we haven't talked about our favorite movies of all time, but he directed my favorite movie of all time.
Really?
Have I not told you?
I don't think so.
I think I've told you my favorite movie of all time. It's Indiana Jones. Well, it's called The Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay.
But it is the first Indiana Jones.
I didn't know it was
movie.
your favorite movie of all time.
I'm not saying it's the best movie of all time.
I didn't say that. I'm
I'm saying it's my favorite movie of all time.
Good for you. That's
Yeah.
cool.
So, in fact, we just watched it about a month ago. Less than a month ago.
See,
So-
he's in the mainstream lexicon of the movie world with these huge hits, but he has such soul and such depth that if he hadn't created such a great character in Indiana Jones, would you have cared at the end as much as you did? Would you have cared, that he was in such peril or that she was in such peril? He creates true human conditions and bonding and significant other relationships, and then puts this whole world around it.
Yeah, that's true. And
That's crazy.
Another great example of kind of the difference between from what I think the difference between Spielberg and these other directors we've talked about so far is that Spielberg brings in somebody like Ben Burtt, who's the sound designer for Star Wars and is a sound designer for Indiana Jones, all 3 Indiana Jones movies, and like down to like when Indiana Jones punches somebody, it sounds nothing close to realistic. When Indiana Jones fires his revolver, it's not even close to a revolver sound. But in this world, it sounds perfect. And it's when I think about a gun a gun firing in a movie, that's what I think about. And so I don't think that Steven Spielberg like specifically said like I want to create this exact sound, but he may have said like work on this for me and come back to me and we'll talk about it type of a thing.
But if it wasn't there, he wouldn't have been like, okay, yeah, we'll go with that, but it's not quite what I'm listening to. You know what strikes me is that once again, just 2 years ago, he did it again with Lincoln. Not my favorite movie of the year. I'm not even sure I understood what he wanted us to get out of that movie. I'm not sure it was a...
I think you really liked the Doris Kearns Goodwin book.
Yeah, see, I don't know anything about that book, so I don't really know. It was more about the 13th Amendment and how that figured into Lincoln's life. We've talked about this. I saw a documentary a couple weeks before I saw Lincoln, and I thought that documentary was way more interesting, and he went with a different approach. He went with what was happening in that slice of life moment of the 13th Amendment, and it's a great performance by Daniel Day-Lewis. It's a great performance by Sally Fields. All of them are great. The small minor characters being played by, great epic actors.
Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah, Tommy Lee Jones, who's fantastic in that. I actually thought he was going to sweep away with the Oscar that year, but Christoph Waltz won for Django Unchained. But anyway, would you associate the director who made Lincoln, which is this drab, in a good way, gray, musty, old-looking film? It's got such style because it's so old-looking, and the realism in that film. Would you ever associate that director with Close Encounters of the Third Kind or Jaws or any of the Jurassic Park films? Those mainstream directors who would have directed those probably wouldn't have an interest in something like Lincoln, but that's what Spielberg does. He finds his interest in that story, and he tells it to the best of his ability. I mean, it sounds like I'm kind of downplaying it a little bit, but that's how I feel about it. Like, you would never, which one of these don't go with the other? It's fascinating. What are you laughing at?
Oh, just how I feel like it's too much of a, it's too much of a task to explain why we like Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, I know. I started getting lost in my own thought going.
Well, no, it's like, I mean, of course we like Steven Spielberg. I don't want to say it like that, but he hasn't done anything to make me not like him, I guess. And
well, he keeps topping himself too. So
and he takes on challenges. Like, I mean, he made AI, which is a Kubrick movie that was supposed to be made, and that's a tough thing to do because he had to honor the vision of Kubrick, but make it his own, which is, I'm sure, what Kubrick would have wanted him to do. But
well, didn't they say in that documentary? Didn't Kubrick say that the whole entire time he was setting up for AI, that he kept saying Spielberg should be making this movie, you should be making this movie? I love that story that Spielberg tells in that documentary about how Spielberg is always showing Kubrick. First, he gets to see Spielberg's new film first, even if it's not completed. And Spielberg says to Kubrick, "How come I never get to see one of your films first?" And Kubrick replies, "'Cause you're you and I'm me." I love that story.
Oh, there you go. We could talk about the Coen brothers. Or no, let's talk about Hitchcock.
Okay.
Because he's on my list too. I mean, he's right there in my pantheon of directors. So I haven't seen all of his movies, but I feel like I've seen, a good chunk, and there's been some movies. I think I saw The Birds a long, long time ago.
It was just on.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
It's frightening.
But since I was, really young, I went through kind of like a Hitchcock phase where they re-released a lot of his movies on DVD in the, early 2000s. And, I just kind of, ran through all those: Rear Window, Psycho, Rope, Strangers on a Train. We talked about that one.
North by Northwest.
It took me a while to see that movie, but I do like that movie. I kind of came to that through Cary Grant. I was watching some other Cary Grant stuff, and I was like, oh, wait, Cary Grant, Alfred Hitchcock, let's do this.
Yeah, a friend of mine took a film class in college, and they studied Hitchcock for a whole semester. So he was always bringing a new Alfred Hitchcock film home once a week. So that's how I saw Vertigo. That's how I saw The Birds. I saw The Birds when I was a kid, younger. It came on TV, and my mom's like, "You have to watch this movie," and I was like, "Why are you making me watch this movie, man?" And I think it was edited for TV, so it wasn't as
okay.
No,
so there weren't any eyes poked out or anything.
I remember that for some reason. I mean, maybe we rented it. I don't really remember, but yeah, he has and they studied Rope, and then Dial M for Murder. They studied those.
I love Dial M for Murder.
Yeah, it's well done.
That might be my favorite one.
I like Rear Window. And the thing that's interesting about Hitchcock is that he might not have created different worlds like completely different worlds where all of a sudden there's a Lincoln or there's a Saving Private Ryan amongst Close Encounters. He's not like that. It sort of has the same dark edge throughout all of his films, but what he did was created these worlds that had been so imitated over. I mean, whole movies have been imitated. Body Double, a Brian De Palma film, as a takeoff on Rear Window. Rope has been redone. Dial M for Murder was redone with Gwyneth Paltrow and Michael.
Perfect Murder.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so the idea of his film have been redone over and over again. So that's a really high form of flattery, is imitation. And just the ideas alone that he came up with and that he worked on. He was another person who was meticulous and created these worlds and did all this research and all this. It's fascinating how much he really delved into it. And a lot of times it was at the demise of his private life. A lot of these people have family issues, or sibling or spouse issues, because they're never home, because they're spending 17, 18 hours on the set working on one bathroom scene in Psycho, and the blood in Psycho. How is he going to do the blood in Psycho? Fascinating how in depth they went to get what they got. So,
and he was innovating back then. With movies like Rope, or like you said, with that shower scene in Psycho. I mean, there's innovations, and even in the way that he released that movie and how he, came out there and told everybody not to tell people, what the end was.
yeah, it's great.
Or what the twist was or whatever. And then he also, from what I heard, and maybe this is an urban legend, he bought all of the available Psycho books in the United States. Is that not a
No,
real
I
thing?
heard that too. And I think I saw that in a documentary, and I think that's in that movie with Anthony Hopkins, where
Oh, really?
Anthony Hopkins plays him, and what's her name
Naomi
plays?
Watts?
No. Oh, geez, the Queen.
Helen Mirren.
Yes, thank you. Plays his wife, and Scarlett Johansson plays.
Tippi Hedren.
No,
Dang it.
we always get Tippi Hedren and Janet Leigh mixed up.
Okay.
Janet Leigh, she plays Janet Leigh, and they actually show the filming of the shower scene. The interesting thing for me is how much he got away with without getting away with anything. How much nudity you think you see when you see nothing.
There's no nudity in
No,
that. Yeah.
none. But the way it's shot, it does give you the illusion that, she's completely naked and you see it, but you see nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's really cool. So where's Vertigo at? Because that's like the Sight and Sound #1 movie of all time now.
Yeah, I don't get that.
I don't either.
I don't get it. I just recently saw it, I have to admit, for the first time all the way through, beginning, middle, and end. And it's so often imitated, and so often you see it, and you see so much about it before you actually, if you've never seen the film, you've seen so many clips and so many things from it that maybe that had something to do with it for me. But I'm pretty good with separating the buzz for a movie or trailer for a movie. Like we talked about not watching too much of Interstellar because it would influence the way we watch the movie. I don't really have a problem with that. I can usually tell from a trailer whether or not I'm going to like the movie. I've noticed that. I have this instinct about the feel of a movie from the trailer and can almost instantaneously tell how much I'm going to like it. But anyway, I finally saw Vertigo from beginning, middle, and end, and I thought it was good. And I thought it was interesting, and I love Jimmy Stewart, and I love the lady. I can't remember what her name is.
Eva St. Marie?
No, it's not.
Kim Novak.
Yes, exactly. Beautiful. And I thought it was interesting, but I thought when you finally figure out the plot twist, you're like, really? Somebody would have done that? You know what I'm talking about? You've seen Vertigo, right? Where she's supposedly somebody that she's not, and supposedly living in the ghost of this woman and all this other. And then you find out what really happened. You're like, I don't buy it. I don't buy anybody would do that. So I don't know. Maybe because at the time it had such an impact, but yeah, it's now the #1 film. I don't get
it either.
I don't get it. Okay.
There's so many other Hitchcock movies to me that are so
I was just going to
much
say the same
better.
thing. I think Rear Window is way better for me. I think Psycho is infinitely better for me. I think Rope is better for me. I think The Birds is better for me. Just there's something about those worlds that in North by Northwest, even though there's not as much of a twist, there's a little bit of a twist with Eva Marie Saint's character where you're like, oh, she's doing that because of this. You can buy into it.
Yeah.
And then you've seen these scenes on Mount Rushmore. You've seen these famous scenes, and they work. And then the plane coming over top of Cary Grant,
It works in context too.
Absolutely.
It works as a really cool scene just by itself.
Vertigo, when you see the spinning Vertigo and Jimmy Stewart falling,
And he's falling,
and you're like, it looks kind of trippy,
It
silly,
actually looks cheesy.
a little bit.
I think it looks cheesy because it's rear projection.
Your words, not mine.
Well, I mean, we're sitting here saying that, according to somebody, the best movie of all time looks cheesy. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what that's based on. I'd like to know what the scale of
I don't know.
judging something like that.
We must be missing something.
A little bit.
Martin Scorsese.
I have a list, and then on the bottom, Martin Scorsese. He's the perfect example. I cannot say a bad word about him because there's just no need for something like that. There's no need to figure and nitpick and figure out what your least favorite thing is. It's no need for it because he delivers time and time again. And on top of that, he is the king of what I'm talking about. The reason why these directors are fascinating to me. In the middle of Goodfellas, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, these intense, grotesque films, The Departed, hard films, hard-edged characters. There's The Age of Innocence. There's Night Shift, or not Night Shift. Oh gosh, what's it called? I just thinking of Ron Howard, not Night Shift. With Terry Garr and good Lord, I can't think of it.
I haven't seen it. I'm looking it up right
Is
now.
it Night Shift? No.
It could be with Michael Keaton?
No.
Okay,
That's the
that's
Ron
Night Shift,
Howard
too.
film with Michael Keaton. Good Lord, I can't even think of the.
I'm looking it up right now. So we've got, there's New York.
Good example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and so you're right. You've got Mean Streets, which was kind of like, wasn't that like kind of his first, gritty?
It's what made everybody notice him.
Yeah, and there's also the first time he worked with Robert De Niro. I think.
Yeah.
And then you've got Taxi Driver. I'm just looking at some of these bigger movies.
And then all of a sudden, Alice doesn't live here anymore.
Alice doesn't live here anymore.
Which one of these don't go with the other? About a waitress who's moving across the country with her son and Goodfellas.
Mm-hmm.
What?
And then Raging Bull, and then 2 years later, King of Comedy.
Right.
Is that the one you were talking about?
No.
Okay.
That's a strange movie. though.
Yeah.
That's an off-putting movie. That fits way more into Scorsese category than a lot of the other ones that I'm talking about. Keep reading them.
Mhm. Color of Money, After Hours.
After Hours.
That's
That's
what it
it.
was.
Why'd I say Night Shift? I guess because it all takes. Yeah.
After Hours at night. So
Yeah,
I guess maybe.
yeah.
But yeah, and I mean, Color of Money, Last Temptation of Christ.
Yeah.
That is a good movie. And
Still has an edge to it though. That is just a little off-putting. He definitely pressed some buttons in that film.
he did well, and then just the fact of making it pressed buttons. You know what I mean? Kind of like Dogma, like Kevin
Yeah.
Smith, made Dogma, and then there's a famous TV, like a clip from like some TV local TV channel in New York or Boston or somewhere where they were protesting the movie, and he was out there protesting with them.
Scorsese was?
Kevin
Kevin
Smith.
Smith. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
He was out there, and they asked a bunch of people. This is a Kevin Smith Dogma tangent, but they asked a bunch of people like, so why do you hate this movie? And they're like, well, it's horrible. And they're like, oh, so when did you see it? And they're like, well, we haven't seen it.
The same thing happened with The Last Temptation of Christ.
Exactly.
They kept quoting the fact that Christ says, I have the devil inside me. And they heard that he says this. But in context of the movie, it made perfect sense. Now, the scene with Mary Magdalene, have you seen The Last Temptation of
It's
Christ?
been a long time.
Okay. There are some really off-putting, button-pushing scenes that I could see why somebody who had the believer side in them could be offended by it.
Mm-hmm.
But the things that people were talking about were things that they heard and they hadn't even seen the film. And then at the very end of the movie, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Where he shows the film frame and the red and kind of green and flashing lights. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh no, not that part. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't remember that part.
Yeah. What part were you thinking I was talking about with the helicopter and?
Well, I thought you were talking about how. I don't know. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen it. Why don't you go forward?
Okay.
with
Well,
this?
there's a shot of Christ in you could tell it's a helicopter that's coming above him because all of the grass and everything is blowing in the wind, and he doesn't mask the fact that he's using a helicopter. You don't see a helicopter, but he doesn't mask the fact that the wind is doing what it's doing, and it only could be doing it because there's a helicopter above Christ. And then at the very end of the film, I think it's right before the credits show, there is this, you see this film, like the actual film with the dots on the side of it.
Looks like it's coming out of the gate.
Well, sort of, yeah, but it kind of flashes a little bit, and then there's like this strobe light type of thing. And we discussed it in my directing class back in college, and the directing teacher said he thought that was the best moment of the film because he was saying to everybody, this is just a movie, people. Relax. It's just my movie. It's just a movie. This is just moving pictures. This is just lights. It's not that big of a deal. But he did push some buttons, though, because there's a couple of scenes in there where I could go, okay. And then everybody had a hard time with the fact that, he was tempted by Another Life with Mary Magdalene. And I thought, well, that's the last temptation. It's his interpretation.
He may have been.
Who knows?
I mean,
who knows? He was tempted 3 times in the desert.
Exactly.
So, who knows? I loved it. As a matter of fact, I have often said that if that's the Christ that the modern day church would teach, many more people would follow freely, because he was a man who was struggling not as being the Son of God from this movie, Last Temptation of Christ. This is my interpretation. He was a man who was struggling with being a man who supposedly was the Son of God. He was doubting it. That's why he says, I have the devil inside me, because he hears voices. Well, would you think it was God talking to you back in the day? No, you would think it was the evil spirit trying to take over your body, because that stuff happened back then. So he was like, wait, I'm perplexed. Wait, I'm who? What? Wait. And then this other thing was a controversy, but I thought that makes so much sense that no one has thought about that before. You see him building crosses, making crosses. Well, what
he was a carpenter?
Exactly. And what would a carpenter have done back then?
It would have made the crosses that they used for crucifixion.
Makes perfect sense, and it's a kind of foreboding, foreshadowing of what's going to happen to him. So I liked it.
Yeah, I need to revisit that movie.
It's interesting.
I remember going into it, going into watching it thinking, this is a controversial movie, but then coming out of it, it's thinking,
God, I think Christ is cool. Jesus is just all right with me. That's what I thought. What year was that?
When I watched it?
No, what year was the movie made?
The movie was made in the early...
Like 86,
88.
Okay, I saw it in 88 one time, and I remember everything from that one time that we just talked about. Scorsese, man.
There you go.
All hail.
Paul Schrader was the screenplay. He wrote the screenplay for that.
And didn't Peter Gabriel do the soundtrack? I think he did. I think that's his first. I think that's the first time he delved into soundtracks, or he does the.
He does the score?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm still trying to look up full cast because you gotta dig deep into the IMDb for that.
Or it was either him or David Byrne, one of the two.
Well, they've got sound department, and I don't know if it's got him in there. Stunts, visual effects.
Well, sound department would be different, wouldn't it?
Yeah, music department, but then they've got all these musicians and composers.
It doesn't
and
say.
Stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I don't see that. I mean, there may be another way to look that up, but I'll have to look that up later on. So did you have anything else did you wanted to say about Martin Scorsese? I mean, obviously you do.
We could do a whole show on Martin Scorsese, and then we just talked about The Last Temptation of Christ. What's the last movie Martin Scorsese put out? The Wolf of Wall Street. What? Which one of these don't go with the other? It's fascinating that he is indulgent to the point where he makes it so real that you cannot deny the worlds that he has created. And we have talked about Wolf of Wall Street being one of our favorite films last year, and it was.
It was one of mine, yeah.
And it could have been a mess. It could have been just this indulgent mess of 3 hours, but it wasn't. It had a clear-cut vision. He did everything he normally did, but I forgot it was him who directed it. There were things about it that were Scorsese-esque, but I didn't feel like he overplayed it or it was heavy-handed. He creates a world without really... It's his own world and there's a style to it, but you can't put your finger on what his thumbprint is. You know, you could say, okay, that's a Paul Thomas Anderson film in the first 5 minutes of most of his movies. Fincher, you can say that. Scorsese, it takes a little while for you to. He definitely moves the world around.
And maybe he shapes himself to the subject matter as opposed to some of these other directors we're talking about that they shape the subject matter to their likings.
Interesting.
You know, and maybe that's kind of where
I'm sure
he's
there are.
at.
I'm sure there are themes that are the same. One man's obsession with whatever. Wolf of Wall Street being drugs and money. You know, The Last Temptation Christ being Christ, and The Aviator being obsessed with everything. Yeah. So
Well, and I wonder if so. Looking at Martin Scorsese and looking at the next director that I want to talk about, Quentin Tarantino, both of these guys have an intense love for film.
Absolutely.
Like, an insane love for film.
yeah, almost so I couldn't have a conversation with either of them. They're out of my league by far.
They'd be well, and I've told you this. I may have even let you borrow the Hot Fuzz documentary, the Hot Fuzz movie. There's a commentary that's on the DVD and the Blu-ray that is Edgar Wright and Quentin Tarantino supposedly talking about the movie Hot Fuzz. They spend zero time talking about the movie. All they do is just have movie references the whole time. They're like, oh, that's like this part in this movie and that part in this movie. Except it's not mainstream movies. These are like deep cut movies that I haven't heard of half of them. More than half, probably.
Right.
And you're right. I would feel like I'm completely out of my league.
I would listen intensely at a party to both of them having a conversation,
Yeah.
but I would not open my mouth. Not for a split second.
So you've got Scorsese, you've got Tarantino, and they both have spent all this time. Scorsese, when he was a kid, was really sick, and he spent a lot of time in bed, and that's, I guess, how he ingested all of this media, or he would go to the movies. And I'm guessing that, I don't know, I know he missed a lot of school. So anyway, he saw a lot of movies from a very young age, and he just ingested all of that, and that's formed who he is as a filmmaker. Same thing with Quentin Tarantino. He has spent his whole life just ingesting all this media, and then he's able to, make things for us. So
Well, the interesting thing about Tarantino for me is how he can imitate and blatantly rip something off, but make it his own at the same time. We talked about Django Unchained at some point, how he's the only person I've ever seen get away with some kind of modern day song in the middle of a Western. You're like, wait, this rap song should not be here, but yet it fits perfectly. And then, he uses Son of a Preacher Man in Pulp Fiction, where it sort of fits, but it's not the right time frame, but it's making a statement. He has a way of imitating and ripping off, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
I mean, all of Kill Bill,
He
all
would
the fight
say-
sequences are complete. He said it
he would
himself.
say
Yeah,
it's homage. I mean, it's completely homage as opposed to innovation of filmmaking.
he would say it was theft.
He probably would
Yeah.
say it was theft. But so I mean, he's another director that he's one of the, I'd call all of these guys auteurs.
Yeah, I like
with
that
the
word.
auteur theory type of a thing. But it's good that he's focused himself on writing his own scripts. And I mean, has he? What was his last movie? Was it Django Unchained?
yeah.
Okay, so that was his
Yeah,
own.
now he's got Hard 8 he's working on, or not Hard 8, the 8.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I keep messing up the titles.
Not Hard 8.
See, this is why I would
if
never
you
have a
wouldn't said
conversation.
Hard 8,
Yeah.
then I would. Maybe we would have been.
I would never have a conversation with him for this exact point.
Because you would have said the wrong
I would.
movie.
Oh my God, he would be so on top. He would hate me. He'd be like, "Whoa, no."
I'll look up his new movie, but all of his movies have been written and directed by him. Now, Jackie Brown was based on Rum Diary.
Yeah,
Rum Diary? Yeah,
sure.
not Rum Punch, but the Rum Diary. Yeah, and so that was Elmore Leonard. But all the other ones that he's done have
Been his own.
Been his own. I mean, I think Reservoir Dogs. Some people have said that he's kind of stolen the
You could pretty much say that about everything.
the
He's
story for Reservoir
yeah.
Dogs, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, so what? Look what he gets.
exactly. Yeah,
I mean, there's a fine line between what was the word you use, homage,
Yes.
versus theft. I mean,
Yeah.
and he does it so well that it's, once again, imitation is the highest form of flattery. He does it so well that he makes it his own. So more power to him.
Mm-hmm. The Hateful Eight. That's what
There
it's
it
called.
is. Hard Eight, Hateful Eight,
That's
HE. Close enough. Better than what I've
It
been
was
saying.
close.
After Hours or Night Shift.
Well, I mean, I don't really have much else to say about Tarantino. We've talked about him in the past, but
Here's the thing about Tarantino. Every single time I hear he's making a new movie, I get this small sense of anticipation where I go, what is it going to be like? And he can't do it again. I keep thinking to myself, when I went to see Django, I was like, yeah, it's going to be good, but is it going to be as great as it was? I had no clue. And he's won 2 original screenplay Oscars, that and Pulp Fiction, and deserved. Because have you heard any kind of dialogue before, like his dialogue? Have you heard any, look at Inglourious Bastards, the monologues in that are so specifically written. I don't know how they can, that you need somebody as talented as Christoph Waltz to say those words, because they are Shakespearean in their episodicness.
yeah.
They're epic.
Epic. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I will say this: when I saw Inglourious Basterds, that first scene where it's, you're right, it's a monologue, and the tension that was created in the first scene in the farmhouse was, I didn't think that I would see that in a movie theater. Does that make sense? Like, I've seen other movies that create tension like that, Kubrick movies and other movies where there are scenes that create this kind of tension, but I always thought that, like, they've already been made.
Oh, I see what you're
I
saying.
didn't know that it's like, this is a thing that
Yeah.
was made this year, and I'm
Interesting.
seeing it right now, and it can still happen. The whole, like, I guess, modern classic type thing. It's like a movie you can't say a movie's your favorite movie, when you walk out of the theater, because there's got to be some sort of space, between it. But when I saw that, and when I saw Inglourious Basterds, I turned right around. It's not literally, but later on that week, I went back and saw Inglourious Basterds again, because I was like, let's just make sure that this is real. I did the same thing with There Will Be Blood. I was just like, let me see that again.
Yeah, I'm resisting that urge with Birdman. I want to see it again because I want to see what the second take, especially this amount of distance between it now.
Yeah.
But I'm guaranteeing I'm going to be exactly in the same
You'll
place.
be just as
Yeah,
happy.
absolutely. Speaking of which, Alejandro Gonzalez, and I'm still not sure if it's Iñárritu or Inarritu. I was looking at him to talk about him because of Birdman this year, but then I thought Babel, loved it.
21
Beautiful.
Grams.
I love 21 Grams.
See,
And
I saw it once, and it was a long time ago, but
and for whatever reason, people did not notice that film. They did because Benicio del Toro was nominated, Naomi Watts was nominated, and it had Melissa Leo in it, and Sean Penn, which I think I've said before, would have been my pick for his Oscar nomination that year versus Mystic River. I thought 21 Grams was a way more interesting character, although he is pretty freaking amazing in Mystic River. But there's something just a tad bit different to where Iñárritu does this thing with your imagination where he tops your own imagination. Like 21 Grams, you remember what the title comes from? It comes from the fact that when you die, you weigh 21 grams less when your spirit leaves your body. And I finger quotes there.
so your soul is 21 grams.
That's what I
heavy.
love the idea of that. It's fascinating to me. And then the intricacies of that plot. And I don't know if you remember, Sean Penn has a heart transplant via something that happens to some of the characters in the movie.
Is there a car wreck in that movie?
Yes.
Okay, because Amores Perros also has a car wreck in it. That was the first movie that I'd ever heard of, Iñárritu.
Right, which I have not seen. I've got to check it out.
You should watch it. It's very stylized, and I think it's not dubbed. What's the word? It's subtitled. So
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
Still, yeah. I mean, and it's got Gael Garcia Bernal in it, who I was talking to you about earlier. He's one of the stars in the new Amazon show Mozart in the Jungle.
Oh yeah.
And he was in Y Tu Mamá También, and he's been in a couple other.
Well, there's been a
too.
few directors out there, Paul Thomas Anderson being one, Quentin Tarantino, where you go and you see their next movie and you're like, oh my gosh, they did it again. And I did not know that this director, Iñárritu, was the same director who did all these films until I saw Birdman, and then I kind of connected the dots, and I was like, oh, he did Babel? Oh, I love Babel. Oh, he did 20. Oh, I love. And Beautiful is crazy interesting.
I need to see that.
Yeah, it's he just does something a little metaphysical. He does it in Birdman too, because you're like, what is going on there? I've heard all these crazy interpretations of what's Michael.
That's great though.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's perfect because he's tapping into what you see. He's allowing his vision to open up your mind and your interpretation, even though he probably has his own idea of what's going on the screen, but it's like a great song. Even though the song is specifically about this issue, you can pull your own emotions out of it and relate to it on a different level. So I think he's going to win Best Director.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
I hope he does.
I gotta put Terry Gilliam in there.
I was just looking at his name.
We'll just slide him in. You know, he's even 12 Monkeys. I think is uniquely Gilliam, and
absolutely
they gave him a boatload of money, and he made his movie. And I think that
I love
that's
that
awesome.
movie.
I do too.
What is that considered his mainstream film?
Oh yeah.
Well, you can tell.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just
you got Bruce Willis starring.
What's
in
the
it.
Fisher King considered then? Fisher King's way more mainstream. It has less Terry Gilliam-esque things.
I think that Fisher King had as much. I mean, I'm sure it had a Oscar push, but I don't think it has much of a like. Let's get everybody out to the theaters this weekend type of a push.
I think it did.
It did.
Robin Williams was nominated for Best Actor. Mercedes Rules won for Best Supporting Actress.
So people were going to the theater to watch it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're saying were people going to see that like they were going to see 12 Monkeys?
There was like a I don't know. I just remember like the posters being around, and granted I was older. I was paying attention to that kind of stuff because I was about 14 years old when it came out, and when the other one came out I was not much younger, but I was definitely younger. Was it 91 or something like that when Fisher King came out? But anyway, I just feel like there was a there was a big push for that movie, and it didn't hit where they wanted it to hit. And since then, you can kind of tell that that Gilliam hasn't been given that much money.
Well, wasn't Time Bandits a big hit?
Oh, Time Bandits was a big hit, but just kind of, I think, like out of nowhere, and then that's where they started giving him, money for Baron Munchausen,
which I loved,
and all of those. So yeah, and then Brazil, I mean, they gave him a bunch of money for that too, and he once again made his own movie, and then they tried to screw him on it, but. Did you see any of there's like a documentary, about that, and
fascinating,
that
he's a little bitter about it.
Oh, he was very bitter,
yeah. But Terry Gilliam, he sort of is more like Quentin Tarantino than like Scorsese. In between, he doesn't have the in between films. He doesn't have an After Hours. He doesn't have an Age of Innocence. He doesn't have The Last Temptation of Christ. Going into it, this is a Terry Gilliam film. It's going to look, sound, and be like this. But it's like somebody who paints with the same color. Let's say his color is blue. He always uses blue, but he finds different depths and shadows and shades of blue that only he could find. Like the Fisher King, only the night could look like he did in a Terry Gilliam film. Do you remember what I'm talking about with all of the red garment and the flowing?
It's been a long time.
Oh, it's fantastic. You should see that filming. Yeah, it's a really good film. It's just overall well done. It's well done storytelling. And this is something we have not mentioned in this show yet, is that all of these directors are great storytellers. Doesn't matter what their style or what their paintbrush color is. Doesn't matter if they're painting in pink, blue, yellow, green. When they do paint in that color, they're also telling a well-rounded story, especially Tarantino, especially Scorsese. I mean, all of these directors. And Terry Gilliam, he does a really great job of telling these crazy worlds, or putting these crazy worlds together, but telling this very human story. Look at 12 Monkeys. That's ultimately about a guy who's dealing with his past, and he doesn't know his past is the future and his future is the past, and so forth and so on. It's mind-boggling to talk about, but it all makes sense when you're watching it. It's kind of really heartfelt. Some of the touching moments he gets out of, and
his movies are about the little man. I mean, it's about the oppression of whatever it is, government, society, and about what that does to the everyday guy.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
it's really hard pressed in Fisher King because you have Jeff Bridges' character who's like this huge money making DJ, night talk show host guy who's kind of flippant and doing really well, and then Robin Williams, who's a homeless guy who Jeff Bridges has to come off his pedestal to help this guy, and by helping him, he helps himself, and that's really cutting it down to its bare minimum, but it's really touching and it's really heartfelt. And you would think with somebody as stylistically blessed as Terry Gilliam is, those things would get lost. But I think that's why these films work so well, because at their core, they're human condition stories. Fascinating.
Yeah. Steven Soderbergh.
He's not on my list, but I knew he was going to come up.
Well, one reason I wanted to bring him up is because I found out that he's recutting movies again. He recut 2001: A Space Odyssey.
What did he do?
He cut out a couple of things.
See, I don't know about that. That gives me a little bit of.
Well, I mean, he did
that's
it
a pause
for his. He did it for his own, edification, like just to see what he could do. He didn't do it because he didn't like it. He did it because.
That's fascinating. There are movies out there that I wanted to re-edit.
I don't think it was one of those things. I don't think it was one of those like, I'm going to make this movie better type of things, but it's I'm going to you need to read his blog. He describes
what else has he done that to? He's done
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, right.
Mm-hmm. He didn't re-edit that one. He just made it black and white and put like the Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor scores from the David Fincher movies. He just interspersed those in there, and he did that specifically to show framing. How Steven Spielberg is really good at framing, and it just focuses you on the visuals, the visual style of that movie, as opposed to all the other stuff that's going on, like cool punch sounds and cool gun sounds.
And so, what was his reasoning for
2001?
Yeah, remanipulating 2001. That's kind of strange to me, but I don't know what he's doing, so I'm not gonna fault him. I'm just saying.
He's such. You should read. I can't do it justice, but I think you should read his blog entry because he's very tender with his description. I didn't get to see it because it got taken down from YouTube. Like
Why?
It was probably MGM or whoever owns it. Whoever owns 2001, Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers told him to take it down. Which I'm sure he obliged. But so anyway, I didn't get to actually see what he did to it. I've just heard some descriptions of what he did, and this was a couple weeks ago that he released this. But yeah, you should take a read because he said he's thought about this type of a thing, messing around with these, and because he's not actively directing anything right now. I think he may be doing Broadway. I'm not really sure, but he's not actively directing any movies right now, and so he's doing these things as exercises and just to see what. What he can learn from doing that. So, I mean, I don't know. In some ways, you could look at it and like, what better movie to play around with than one of the classics. Unless you look at it as blasphemy, which you do.
Well, no, I'm not saying it's. But no. I see where he's coming from, why he wants to do that, but at the same time, it's almost like, I don't know. For me, that's such a interesting film, the way that it is, that when you just described what he did to Raiders, that makes sense. It's an exercise to understand something that maybe somebody like me, who's not a director, doesn't have a director's eye, would see something different. And the idea of how it would be like if somebody put slow motion to a play, you filmed a live play, and then you put slow motion to it, and then you stopped it in certain places, because the idea is that directors are painting pictures with real life people. Mm-hmm. And so you can actually stop a play at some point, and you will be able to look at that picture and tell what's going on in the context of the play by how the director paints that picture. So maybe that's the same thing that he's doing. I mean, good. It sounds like he's a little bit more time on his hands than he. Yeah, good for him though.
He does now. Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't you if you could? I mean, I guess
Yeah.
I just need to understand that more before I get, thinking it's blasphemy.
All right. Well, what are some more that are on your list?
Ang Lee is on my list.
Okay.
And here's why. Yet again, I think he's king of this. Next to Scorsese, if you were to line up Ang Lee films, you cannot tell the same guy made them, not necessarily by the style, but because of the subject matter. I mean, he's the same guy who made Sense and Sensibility, Brokeback Mountain, Hulk, Life of Pi, and Crouching Tiger. None of those are even similar in subject
That's
matter.
true.
None of them. I mean, I can't even find a theme that runs between them. And he does it with such beauty. There's a majestic quality to his films. There's a fantasy love that comes across from his movies. Crouching Tiger's prime example. I mean, how he had people flying from tree to tree and bending on branches and stuff like that. Fascinating. Only in that world would that have happened, and he handled it as if it was really happening, and you really believed that could happen. But then you see something as stark and as just lonely in tone as Brokeback Mountain, where nothing happens for 15 minutes. There's just these long shots of things that are just stunningly beautiful. At the beginning of that film always blows me away with just that bare kind of road scene, and the guitar part starts of that famous soundtrack now, and you see the truck just going across it. And it's not like the truck goes halfway across the screen and then he cuts to another scene. The truck goes all the way across the road because you're getting ready to take a trip into a world, a destiny that's laid out for you. And this is the way this world's going to be. It has its beginning, it has its middle, it has its end, but you have to go all the way down the road to get there. And I've often called Brokeback Mountain cinematic art. I know it's got its controversies. I know that people have some hang-ups about it, but it literally is just a beautiful movie to look at. Even on the small screen, even on a black and white screen. I mean, it's so beautiful to look at. And then he gets these incredibly nuanced but yet subtle performances from everybody in that film. And then he does that in Crouching Tiger too. I mean, even though it's more epic in scale, but then he's also the guy who did Sense and Sensibility. You've never seen that film? It's this Jane Austen English drama thing where you're like, what? Are they eating crumpets and tea? And you're like, this is Ang Lee. What? And then,
does he put his spin on it, or I mean, does he have a thumbprint, or does he just?
I see. That's the thing that's hard for me to describe about Ang Lee, because is there a similarity to Crouching Tiger as there is to, his superhero movie, or to Life of Pi, or to what's the other one that he did that's a little bit more? I can't think of it right now, but there's sort of a similarity there. But then with Sense and Sensibility, there's not a thumbprint. No, because I rewatched it to watch it from that point of view, and I would have to say no, there isn't. But yet he still stays true to that world. So maybe he's yet again one of those people who his style bends to whatever the storytelling process is. So I think it's bearing mention of his name for obvious reasons, but he has 3 Oscars. He has one for Life of Pi, one for Brokeback Mountain, and one for Crouching Tiger. 2 Best Directors and 1 Best Foreign Picture. I mean, he has 3 Oscars, 2 of which for directing. Some of these people on this list have none. So, I mean, whatever that bears, relevance to whatever. But I just think he's one of those people that most people don't immediately think of some of the greatest directors of our time. But he definitely belongs there for me.
Great. Who else? Who else you got on there?
Spike Lee.
Spike Lee. All
yes.
right.
Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, he definitely has a thumbprint. He definitely creates his own worlds. He's created his own style, his own look, what's that thing where he puts the actors.
He's on the actors are on like a trolley.
Yeah.
And the camera's locked to the actor, and then they move that whole dolly, trolley, whatever that is.
Yes, he does it in Crooklyn. He does it in
Inside Man.
He does it in Malcolm X. He does it
Did
in.
you do it in Mo Better Blues? I think.
He does something similar to that.
He does a 360 in
Yeah,
that one.
and the thing that's great about he does it in Jungle Fever, and I think it's in Crooklyn where he's the glue sniffer. Spike Lee actually he plays his own character sometimes. Well, actually, almost all of his films.
yeah,
Yeah, and he does that same trolley shot, but he turns the character upside down. And the character is floating upside down. Crooklyn is a great movie.
I haven't seen that
Oh,
one.
I love it. I love it. He's got a style and he's got an edge to him, but there's always this kind of sophistication about the way he sets up his shots and the way that he makes his movies. His movies are not about people I want to have dinner with. You know, I don't want to know these people per se, but I'm definitely interested in knowing about their worlds. And he sets that up brilliantly. As a matter of fact, I just saw Selma, which we're going to talk about next week, and I'm going to bring him up again because he does something that I think this film did not. And we can talk about that next week. But regardless of whether or not you like it or not, he definitely puts his thumbprint on it. And I know I've said that a lot during this show, but he has definitely created his own world. And then there's a film that he did called The 25th Hour. Have you ever seen that? He pulls back on all of those things. I think he does that trolley shot with Anna Paquin when she's in the club.
Oh, okay.
And he uses a whole bunch of different people.
Doesn't she play like a prostitute or something?
No, she plays a young girl who's a student of Philip Seymour Hoffman who shows up at the club.
That's what it is.
Yeah,
Okay.
and she kind of is provocative and sort of flirts with him and pushes
Okay.
Philip Seymour Hoffman into a place he doesn't want to go, yet he goes there.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
there's an actor in that by the name of Barry Pepper.
Barry Pepper,
And
yeah.
I thought he missed an Oscar nomination for that. I thought, when you asked me, you got any miss Oscar nominations? I couldn't think of one of them. He's on the top of my list, Barry
Okay.
Pepper, yeah. So, and then he uses Springsteen's song in 25th Hour in a very appropriate place at the end of the film, and he uses the two towers and the destruction as a backdrop to the story.
And it's really close to the
Yeah.
time of,
Yeah, yeah, and I think he's one of the first people who uses that image in his film.
I think that's true.
And so I think he's brave. I think he creates a world. I think all of the controversy that surrounds him is because people are afraid of what they think his movies are going to be. You have to go see them in order to understand. I love Jungle Fever. I love Do the Right Thing. I love them all. She's Gotta Have It is his first film, and that's black and white. It's a little bit harder to watch because it's rough. But then he did School Days, which is a musical.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's not your traditional musical, but it's a musical. And it's not like anything I've ever seen before. And there's a very famous story from that it's about a light-skinned African-American fraternity and a darker-skinned African-American fraternity.
Oh.
And you know what he did? He separated the two casts and kept them in two separate hotels.
Oh, okay.
And it created this animosity, which they brought to the set. And I'm not sure if this is true, but one of them was more run down than the other one, so I've heard. And it created this atmosphere between these
Us
two.
against them
Yeah,
type.
and that's exactly what he gets in that film. So, Spike Lee.
That's great. That's awesome. What about Francis Ford Coppola?
You see, here's the thing. He's on everybody's lists, but other than The Godfathers, there's what? Apocalypse Now,
Apocalypse Now.
and then what? So right there, those are great.
Yeah.
But everything else that he's created, I don't think I mean, I know he did The Rainmaker, and I know he did the Jack with.
He did Dracula.
Yeah, that's interesting because he used all these old styles of film where
I
he
liked
reversed
Dracula at the time.
Yeah.
Because there were a lot of gimmicks.
Yeah.
And a lot of old time. The way that they were doing some of the he's on the train. There was kind of like this. Miniatures were used.
Yeah.
And
then her rising from the coffin was actually in reverse. She was laying back down and then and the smoke coming in backwards. And so I thought it was interesting. Overall, it's not a great storytelling process for me. The story lacks something. He's miscast a few people in that from in my opinion. And you think Gary Oldman's great. but there are other people who in the cast that I think lack something. I liked it. I think it looks interesting, but no disrespect to him at all, because I love The Godfathers, and Apocalypse Now
Have you
is
seen The Conversation?
yeah. No, I've seen some of it, but I haven't seen all of it. I
Okay.
want to.
Yeah, you should see The Conversation, because I think that movie is, to me, feels like it's a passion project for him, and I feel like he put a lot of himself into that before he kind of went. I mean, he put a lot of himself into Apocalypse Now too, but I mean,
Yeah,
kinda
well, a
went
lot
crazy.
of it went. He won a lot of critic awards for The Conversation, and there were, I think it was up for a couple of Oscars. So no, I haven't seen it. So, but other than that, what is there? Like, you can name one after the next of the Hitchcock films, one after the next of the Quentin Tarantino films, all the way everybody we've talked about. For me, Coppola's great, but he doesn't immediately come to mind when I think of all of these great films that I can't wait to see again. I watch The Godfathers every year around basically the same time, around my birthday in June. I'll watch them back to back. Sometimes I'll watch the third one first and the second one next, and then the first one. Sometimes I'll watch the first one, then the third one, then the second one. Sometimes I never watched that re-edited version where he put it in chronological
Oh,
order.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, he took, I think he did it too for the anniversary, like the 25th anniversary, where he took,
So you have like a whole movie of Robert De Niro.
well, you have pretty much, it starts with Vito
Yeah.
in the
Robert De Niro,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, as a kid.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Starts with this- yeah.
And then it goes in chronological order from that to the end of Michael, or the beginning of Michael, and so forth and so on. And then so for whatever, instead of it being the second part two having the Robert De Niro part, the beginning of the film has the Robert De Niro part.
Yeah.
And then he just cuts it together. I thought it was interesting, but I like it better the original way.
So no, your reaction to Francis Ford Coppola is kind of like my reaction to Oliver Stone, because you haven't talked about him, I haven't talked about him. I have him on the list because I feel like he's not on my he's on my below the line list of if we don't talk about this guy, then whatever.
Fair enough.
And so I mean, if you don't have anything to say about him, I don't really have anything to say about him.
Well, I feel a little bit different about Oliver Stone than I do about Coppola. Coppola sort of has 3 or 4 that I think are great, superb. Stone has quite a few that I think are good, and he continuously engages me. I liked Platoon a lot. I liked JFK. I like those films. What else has he done? Name some other stuff that he's done.
Natural Born Killers.
Yeah, I liked it.
That's an interesting film.
He's the
And
beginning of that too. If you think about it, he is,
the reality TV type stuff.
and making a statement about it, and the ultra violence for just violence sake. It was a big deal back then. You hadn't seen a whole lot of films like that up to that point. I mean, there were quite a few in the past that have stepped on those boundaries, but that one just pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. I liked it.
Yeah, I mean, he's done, like you said, JFK, Nixon,
I liked it.
Any Given Sunday was
I liked it.
it.
It was okay.
Movie. See, but these are movies that are adequate to me. Oh my gosh, I
Fair
just
enough.
said they're adequate.
Well, I mean, I just, there are certain words that I don't want us to come across as being disrespectful. I'm not saying you are. I'm
I
just
can't
saying,
make those movies.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you are. I'm just saying that somebody listening might think that.
How about this? If I have a choice to watch a movie, it's probably not going to be an Oliver Stone movie.
Okay, name some other stuff that he's done.
Let's see here. Heaven and Earth. No, these are producers. I need to go to director. So, W, World Trade Center, Alexander,
Stinker.
U-Turn,
I like that.
Heaven and Earth,
I've never seen it.
The Doors. I mean, you know what?
I liked it.
I liked The Doors. It was fine, and I thought Val Kilmer did a fine job. Born on the 4th of July.
Ah, that's a good one.
Okay, and I haven't seen that one.
Oh, it's very good.
Wall Street.
That's
which
good.
is probably the first one we should have talked about. I don't know.
He got Michael Douglas an Oscar, and he got Tom Cruise's first Oscar nomination and a possible win. Everybody thought he was going to win for that.
So just the fact that I'm
Yeah.
having to read them off, that says something.
Well, I
maybe,
mean,
but-
because my list is what immediately came to mind. I remember seeing them on the list, but when I didn't write them down because I'm not. Yeah, that does say something. You got a point about that.
What about Tim Burton?
he's on a lot of those people's list, and I think that he, try not to be disrespectful, but he has a hard time telling a story for me. I think Edward Scissorhands is a full realized story. And then I really liked Alice in Wonderland, but the gap in between, he's stylistically interesting, but he lacks something in storytelling for me. Big Fish is just this big mess for me. It just doesn't work. It's not concise. It doesn't make its point. It's a father and son drama. The performances are great. And I like his style. I like his animated stuff better. I think his Batman is, everybody keeps calling it the best of the bunch so far because it's so gothic and so stylistically cool, but it's lacking a lot of things. And people are like, well, what's it lacking? Ask a 5-year-old to watch the first Batman film and then ask him, why is Batman a bat? There's no answer to that. And unlike Nolan, who answered all of the questions that could possibly have come up. And Tim Burton said something about casting Michael Keaton. He said, there's something dark behind Michael Keaton's eyes that I thought was important for Batman, but it's not necessarily about the man. It's about the man who created the idea of Batman and all of his gadgets and all of his tools and all of the Batcave and all, which you learn nothing about from that first film. It looks really cool. It's a really cool looking film. Jack Nicholson is great as the Joker. And I like Michael Keaton as Batman. He developed the voice. It's been the same ever since. And part 2 is a mess. Batman Returns is a mess. It's a mess.
But once you get to a certain point, it becomes, a machine. So,
well, it's also, I think he spends a lot of time with the way a film looks versus what the story you're supposed to be learning about,
Which for a movie like, Pee-wee's Big Adventure is
great.
It works because it's kind of vignettes. It's
right.
Like,
and it's
this little movie and that little movie.
Yeah,
and that
he's
little
fantastic in that.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. I've got other ones that, we talked about Cameron Crowe earlier, and I get excited whenever movies of his come out, and I do need to see the Zoo movie, but they're always interesting for me, and I think I'm just scared that I'm not going to like the Zoo movie, and I don't want that to happen.
I don't think it's gonna freak you out too much.
The Scott brothers, Ridley and Tony Scott.
Interesting. I don't have them on my list only because the list could only be so big, but Ridley Scott, he's amazing, and I like Tony Scott too. Tony Scott started out as a way more interesting director than he became, in my opinion. But you can't fault him for what he did. He did what he did well.
He wasn't I think Tony Scott wasn't afraid to, to try new things, and for the sake of trying new things. Like if you see Man on Fire, did you see that?
Yeah, I did.
That one. Some of the tricks that he used in there,
they all seem similar though
and stuff
for me.
Yeah, he's
like there's
more
not
of
a matchstick
director.
There's not a matchstick men in Tony Scott's. He starts with The Hunger, which is definitely different than anything he's made.
But then somehow he gets Top Gun.
Yeah, and then he
just goes on that Top Gun
which is
tangent.
fine. Which is fine.
Which Top Gun's an amazing movie. All right, I said it. Okay, so what about foreign directors? Did you have any?
I don't.
Okay.
Depends on how you define it.
Directors not from the United States.
Ang Lee?
That's one.
Okay.
Have you heard of Wong Kar-wai?
No.
He's done a couple of movies. The one I think that is my favorite is called In the Mood for Love, and it's a really slow movie, but it's interesting because it's a relationship movie about these two people who can't have a relationship, and you should definitely seek it out. It's set in Hong Kong. Everybody's all crammed together, and it's about a man and a woman who are within close proximity of each other, and they get drawn together by multiple situations, and they're fighting their urges to be together.
And it's called In the Mood for Love?
In the Mood for Love.
Interesting.
Yeah. And most of his movies are loosely scripted and are mostly improvised. So kind of like the Drinking Buddies type mumblecore type guys.
Yeah.
The Duplass brothers, that whole ilk. He was doing this back in the early 90s or late 80s and stuff. So Wong Kar-wai. He's done some American movies too. He did an American movie with Jude Law and Norah Jones, the singer.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. I
Blueberry
heard she
Nights.
was great.
She was pretty good. That movie, it kind of missed me. I missed it. Whatever. It just didn't. I watched it in the theater too, and I was just like, I was like, I could have spent my money on something else, I guess. But meaning I could have watched it as a rental, and it would have gotten just as much out of it. But at that time, I was in college, and I was like, dang. Jean-Pierre Jeunet, Delicatessen. We watched that a while ago.
Yeah.
And he also did Amelie, and he's done a couple other movies.
I loved Amelie.
And that whole thing just makes me happy.
Prime example of stylistic world meeting great storytelling, because those are really all fulfilling films. You're watching Delicatessen, you're like, how's it going to play out? How is this going to have a happy ending? Is it going to have a happy ending? I'm okay if it doesn't have a happy ending, but how is this going to end? It's going to end one way or another, dead or alive.
Yep.
Food or not food. And the way that it plays out, you're like, yes, it played out perfectly, because you're hoping it goes that way, but you're never sure because it's pretty dark. Yeah, I loved it. Amelie's the same way. Did he make
he made Alien Resurrection. He shot Alien Resurrection,
which is the
fourth Alien movie.
Which is the one where the two aliens kind of communicate to each other and decide to eat the other alien so they can melt the floor.
I saw that a long, long time ago.
It's where she's a clone.
Yes, she's a clone. And
with
then,
Winona Ryder
yes,
and Ron
Winona
Perlman.
Ryder.
The minor characters are great in that.
And Ron Perlman's in like all of his stuff.
Because he's incredible.
Except for Delicatessen.
Okay, did he also do the Long Engagement?
Very Long Engagement. Yeah, with Audrey Tautou. Yeah.
Fantastic. Have you seen that? Okay, I'm so happy I know this foreign director.
There you go, yeah.
I like those movies. Because isn't Jodie Foster in that and she speaks French?
I don't know.
She plays a character and she never speaks English at all. She speaks fluent French.
Yep.
She's
wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Dennis Leary used to come on to, side note here, used to come on to talk shows, and I forget if it's David Letterman or one of them, might have been the Tonight Show, where he would have his like picks of things to watch, and he would go through things. And of course, when Rescue Me season 2 was out, he's like, okay, Rescue Me. Okay, this is the book you need to see. Okay, this is the play you need to go see, and you need to see A Very Long Engagement because it has Jodie Foster speaking French. Jodie Foster speaking French. Need I say more? And he'd throw it into the corner, and then he would go off on all his picks. And that's how I heard about that film, and I was like, what is Dennis Leary talking about? A French film with Jodie Foster? What?
Yeah.
I thought he was kidding. Like it didn't add up, but there she is. She never once speaks English, and you're like, wait. And she's subtitled like everybody else is, and you're like, wait, this is cool because this person.
Do it.
She totally can do it. She's a very smart woman. So yes, I know all those films.
All right, great.
I'm excited.
Park Chan-wook or Chan-wook Park. He was the director of the original Old Boy,
which I saw.
The Korean Old Boy, and then he also just did Stoker.
Oh, yes. Okay, I know him.
So he's done a couple other movies that I've seen. There was this Vengeance trilogy. I think we might have talked about it once before, but it started off with Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, then Old Boy, and then Lady Vengeance, and all three of those movies are interesting enough to seek them out and watch them. And then he did this vampire priest movie called Thirst, which was wacky. I mean, it was.
Wait, I think I've seen that.
Yeah, it had the guy from. I think the guy from Old Boy was in that.
Thirst sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Well, he's definitely bleak, dark, brooding. Definitely does not spoon feed anything to you, but you get a feeling from Stoker. You get a feeling from Old Boy. Even though I thought Old Boy was a bit exaggerated, and I actually thought Spike Lee's version was more interesting for me, maybe because it was the first version that I saw. But it was funny because Spike Lee is such an exaggerated imagery director that he pulled it back. He kind of condensed it a little bit for me, which was interesting.
Well, the story comes from a manga, whatever you want to call it, a graphic novel.
Okay.
And so I'm guessing that Chan-wook Park probably pulled it back a little bit too.
Really?
From the graphic novel. Yeah.
Well, once again, interesting in style, also an interesting story. Because it's a revenge film, and be careful what you wish for, because you're going to get it, and boy, does he get it. the guy in Old Boy, he learns a lesson big time in that.
I mean, there's a couple of big ones we haven't talked about. Orson Welles. I've only seen a couple of his movies.
We mentioned him when we're talking about
Touch of Evil.
Yeah.
Never mind.
and Heart of Darkness.
I'm just going down my list here. John Huston. I've seen a couple of his movies.
Treasure of the
Sierra Madre is
Yeah.
awesome.
We should watch that again for our Something Old, Something New, Something Boring and
that'd
Blue.
be
We should
great.
bring that back. Yeah.
That'd be great. And then what was the other one? Oh, Mike Nichols.
Yeah, he's on. I was waiting for him. Yeah, long live, dude. Yeah. Speaking of a director who has his own style, his own way of telling a film, but never does the same thing twice. Is The Graduate the same director as Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf's director the same as the Angels in America director? Is the same as The Closer? I mean, once again, which one of these goes with the other? There's not even a. And then he do a Broadway show.
Yeah.
And then he does a film where he puts Cher in it, and she gets an Oscar nomination, wins the Golden Globe, and becomes an actress, and eventually wins an Oscar. Silkwood with Meryl Streep. Have you ever seen
cool.
it? Oh, you've got to see that film. It's Mike Nichols has a way of shaping a film, but yet standing back from it and letting it tell its own story, because it's a biopic, for lack of a better term, but it has this feeling about it. Mike Nichols, he injects something into the movies that, it's not a grittiness. It's not it's a feeling. I don't know how to describe it. And you've never seen Angels in America, have you? Okay, you should seek
But
that.
isn't that a?
It's an HBO.
thing?
It's an
Yeah.
HBO film,
So
but
it's available to me. I just
you
need
should
to,
see it.
I just need to watch it.
it's a watch, but it's well worth it.
I forgot to mention Michel Gondry, who did Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and he's done.
I'm in.
Yeah, he's done a couple of other movies, but any movie that he does, I will seek out. He did a lot of White Stripes videos too.
Oh, you can kind of see that.
He did Fell in Love with a Girl, like the Lego video.
Yeah,
If you've seen
yeah,
that
love
one.
that.
He did Hardest Button to Button, which they have 100 amps,
Yeah.
guitar
Oh,
amps and the bass drums.
I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, he's really great. He's done some kind of kooky movies since then. And then there's a bunch of these directors that I haven't seen many of their movies. Terrence Malick is one of them.
Love him.
Bernardo Bertolucci.
Yeah. He do The Last Emperor?
He did Last Emperor.
Yeah,
yes.
and that's one of those films that I was not old enough to understand when it won Best Picture, and I went back and I was like, is this just one of those artsy-fartsy films that the Academy just loves because it's so sophisticated, nobody knows anything about it, so they're going to vote for it? And then I saw it. It's wonderful.
All right.
It's really well done. It's about a story about somebody I knew nothing about and learned immensely about that character, about what that world was like, and I learned something about myself at the same time. I loved it.
All right. Well, then that sounds like I need to seek out some of his
It's
movies.
epic. I wish that they would do a movie release of those films again, because I would love to see that kind of film on the big screen.
I tried to watch one of his movies, Jack Nicholson movie, The Last Passenger, I think.
I think I've seen that. Didn't he also do that film where Keanu Reeves played the Buddha, played Siddhartha?
Oh yeah.
Where they think that the kid who's being born to Bridget Fonda, I can't believe I'm pulling this out. Bridget Fonda and somebody else is having a kid. And
Little Buddha.
Yep.
Yep. So he's done some movies since then, but what did I see? No, I think I'm thinking of Antonioni. That's what I'm thinking of.
You start talking about these foreign directors, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so ignorant when it comes to this, but I'm feeling kind of sophisticated now.
Good job. Well, that's another one, Antonioni, that I tried to watch one of his movies and it was just too slow. I couldn't handle it.
What has he done?
He did, I don't even have him on my list, but he did Blow Up.
That's a Brian
Yeah,
De Palma.
Blow Up.
Blow Up.
It's not. You're thinking of the John Travolta
Blowout.
one, Blowout.
Right.
This one's Blow Up, which is about a guy who is a London photographer, seems to find something very suspicious in the shots he's taken of a mysterious beauty in a desolate park. So anyway, and The Passenger, I think that's what I tried to watch, but. Anyway, so a couple of the other ones I want to talk about are Francois Truffaut.
Yeah, I don't know much. I've heard a lot, and I know I'm supposed to. This is where I would stop having a conversation when Scorsese started talking. So you don't know much. I know about because didn't he do a film called X or isn't that Truffaut?
Truffaut did. Well, he was a critic, and then he started writing or he started directing. I don't know how to spell his name. Francois Truffaut, TRU. That's what I did wrong. So he's done 400 Blows. So I did see that movie a long, long time ago. It's about a kid. And then he did Jules and Jim, Shoot the Piano Player. Jules and Jim is like one of those. There's
what
other
year was
scenes.
that?
Jules and Jim was in 1962.
What's in 1969-ish?
He did Stolen Kisses.
Okay.
That I've heard of that one. Wild Child's 1970, Mississippi Mermaid 1969. I haven't
I'm
heard
thinking
any
he's
of
somebody
those.
else then.
And then Jean-Luc Godard, Breathless, all these.
I've seen
heard
Breathless,
of these
yeah.
movies, but I haven't seen
And
them.
then there's a Richard Gere remake of that too.
Huh, I didn't know that.
Or maybe it's the same one. I'm not sure.
And then we've got these these British. There's David Lean, who's like a crazy British director, and I haven't seen Lawrence of Arabia. I haven't seen any of his other movies, and I need to get into those. Same thing with John Ford. I haven't seen Stagecoach. I haven't seen Rio Bravo. Is that one of them? I don't even see. And so I feel like these.
Well, I mean, once again, we're back at the place where we can only take so much in. We have all of this great filmmaking that's going on in our lifetime that we're going to actually see. And then we've gone through our phases, can't speak, where we've done Hitchcock. And then we're going back and we're doing older Mike Nichols films because you saw Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It's the first time you've seen that. So, I mean, you can only do so much in a certain period of time in one's lifetime. So you're right. We should spend one whole podcast seeing 3 or 4 films from one of those directors and just say, okay, now we've seen Stagecoach because I've never seen that either.
Yeah.
What else has John Ford done? I'm sure I've seen some stuff.
Well, those are the ones that come to mind. A lot of John Wayne movies, because there was some. Trying to type.
Is he the one that did? He didn't do True Grit, did he?
I think he did. He did The Searchers.
Okay, that one I've seen.
He did.
That's an interesting movie. It's caused a lot of stirs, man.
Yeah, Stagecoach. It's hard to pull these out when I'm reading through. I mean, he did so many movies. He did on average 3 movies a year.
That's crazy. So what we need to do is we need to make a list of 5 of those directors and pick out one of those films, and we'll watch it every other podcast and talk about it.
He directed How Green Was My Valley.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rio Grande. I
think I've seen that too. So, I've seen more than I would have expected just by his name.
Yeah, there you go. And then another thing I wanted to talk about was female directors. There aren't many, which is, I mean, that's, I don't know if it's that they're not getting the chance to make movies that are, that are being widely released or what, but I mean, you got Kimberly Pierce did Boys Don't Cry, which I just recently
Loved
saw.
it.
And Mary Harron, she's done a few movies. She did American Psycho, which is...
It's crazy those 2 movies were made by women.
Yeah.
If you want to stereotype it. And it's the prime example of why you can't stereotype.
Exactly.
And why it's a shame that we're not listening to these voices, because American Psycho is crazy.
And I think that was one of those movies that could only been done, not only been done, it was great that it was done by a woman, because there were a lot of things in that movie subject-wise that you could say, oh, well, these are just, misogynist and all this. I mean, it's like, hey, whoa,
wait
back
a second.
Up. Written by a woman, directed by a woman.
Well,
the
same
screenplay
with
was written by a woman.
Hurt Locker.
Catherine Bigelow.
Well, she made
Point Blank,
which is great.
Break. Sorry.
Yes. Wow. We're doing a good job tonight. Yes, that's a great film. That's got the best chase scene I've ever seen in a movie in my life.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, when they're running through the houses and he throws the pit bull at him and keeps going. Yeah, that's a great movie.
Shoots the gun up in the air.
Yeah, it's great.
So and there's a bunch of I know we're getting long, but there's a bunch of younger directors that are out there and are just to like.
Let me
keep
stop
in
you for
mind.
just a split second because we just went through women really quickly and
That's
we
fine.
didn't mention Barbara Streisand.
Oh,
and she has
okay.
put her fingerprint
She
on.
did Yentl, right?
She did Yentl. She did The Prince of Tides. She did, and then we got Penny Marshall who did Awakenings. There are
Mm-hmm. That's
these.
right. Penny Marshall's done a few movies.
League of Their Own. There are females who have been out there making movies, and for whatever reason, I guess the glass ceiling is what they say.
Mm-hmm.
Because Catherine Bigelow is the first woman to win for Hurt Locker, deservedly so, no doubt about it. Up against her ex-husband.
That's right.
Yeah. So they're
Her
out.
ex-husband with the biggest movie ever.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a tight race that year. But in the end, she's the one who deserved to win. But, Barbara Streisand has been always making films and always had an influence on films. But I guess maybe because she's this big, huge star and she has, she's a pop singer at the same time. She's a movie star. She's a 2-time Academy Award winner, one for a performance and one for a song. You can't fight her about that stuff. But she has an interesting take on things because she's making mainstream films that are just a little off. Prince of Tides is a hard film to watch. Have you ever seen that? Yeah, the subject matter is rough. It's really hardcore. And then just recently, a couple of years ago, with Lauren Bacall, The Mirror Has Two Faces, where she's playing that woman who is trying to be in love with somebody, but they really want to just have a platonic relationship, her and Jeff Bridges, and in a fantastic performance by Jeff Bridges. I mean, he's kind of this geeky, nerdy, a PhD teacher, and they're gathering their forces together to combat loneliness, if you will, for lack of a better term. But yet she starts to crush on him and he sort of starts to feel for her. And they're like, well, wait, do we change each other? Do we want to be companions? Do we want to be more than that? And Lauren Bacall puts in one of the best performances of her lifetime, nominated for the Oscar. Now I think about it, it was years ago that movie was made, but I think that you can't go through female directors without mentioning
Definitely.
Barbara Streisand and Penny Marshall. You just can't, especially since you could argue that Prince of Tides was nominated for Best Picture and Awakenings was nominated for Best Picture, and there's not a reason in the world the two directors shouldn't have been nominated. They should have been two of the front runners who were female way before Catherine Bigelow, and they weren't. So they set a precedence down and made the road a little bit smoother for somebody like Catherine Bigelow. But there were years in between.
Sure.
So, and then we have the young lady, I can't remember her name right now, who directed Selma, which we'll talk about next week. Yeah, and there's
I haven't done any research on Selma at all.
we'll talk about it next week. But young African American woman with a voice of her own who's directed this big, epic biopic, not even biopic, but this historical piece that needed to be told.
Ava DuVernay.
Yes, great name too.
That's a
great
good
name.
All right. And then just really quickly, a couple of up-and-coming directors. We even talked about one recently. Josh Trank is directing Fantastic Four.
Right.
The new one.
Miles Teller is on the new Vanity Fair Hollywood magazine for the
Really?
Oscars thing. Yeah.
Oh, dang.
Looking suave.
Jordan Vogt Roberts did Kings of Summer.
Oh, I love that
Kings
movie.
of Summer, yes.
Love that movie.
And he's now doing another big Marvel movie, I think. I didn't write it down.
Did I just say
but-
Miles Teller was swab or suave?
Yeah, I hope not Swab.
I probably said swab.
Skull Island, the King Kong, whatever you want to call it. They're coming out with a new King Kong movie.
Really?
Yeah, about Skull Island, I guess. And so he's directing that. Derek Cianfrance, who did Place Beyond the Pines and Blue Valentine, he's going to be.
He has an edge about him.
Yeah.
What's the guy who did Whiplash? What's his name?
His name is Damien Chazelle.
Yeah, watch out for him.
Yeah, him too. Especially since Miles Teller. I heard him on a podcast say that he's already signed on for Chazelle's next movie. So.
Oh, good.
Also, there's a director of it's female. She's her name's Michelle McLaren, and she directed a bunch of episodes of Breaking Bad. And I think that I don't know if she's actively working on anything right now, but she's been courted or, looked at for multiple projects. So she's somebody to keep an eye out for, because I think she has kind of a singular. She's done some of the more famous Breaking Bad episodes.
Well, this list is infinite, and I knew this was going to happen with this show. I knew it was going to run long. But, speaking of people that we didn't mention, Spike Jonze, I mean, I'm starting to think of
I've got him on my
Pictures,
list.
and there's just so many of them that it's hard to get them all in.
I'm ticking off the ones that we did talk about, but we're going to have to do this again.
We're living in a great time for movies and filmmakers. I mean, I think it's been, since film has started, we've had some greats, but we are really living in a good time for filmmakers. People have their own voices, and they're not as locked into the studio, and they're doing their own thing. So, I like it.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. Well, if you guys want to check us out on the web, actorandengineer.com is our website. Facebook.com/actorandengineer. That's where we're at on Facebook. And then on Twitter, we're @actorengineer. So we'll see you next week.
Until then.
Bye.